The air at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona carried the dry heat of the desert, but for Captain Eva Rostova, it felt cold. It was a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature and everything to do with the stares that followed her. Across the tarmac, she was a pilot in the United States Air Force, one of the few women qualified to fly the A-10 Thunderbolt II, a plane affectionately known as the Warthog. It was a flying tank, built around a massive cannon, designed not for elegant dogfights, but for brutal, close-quarters support of troops on the ground. It was a pilot's plane, and Eva loved it more than anything. But in the eyes of many of her peers, she didn't belong in its cockpit. Her father, General Ivan Rostova, was a legend. He had been a pilot's pilot, a man whose name was spoken with reverence in the halls of the Pentagon. To the men in her squadron, Eva wasn't Captain Rostova, the skilled aviator who had graduated top of her class. She was the general's daughter, a product of privilege who, they assumed, had her path paved with gold. Her squadron leader, Major David Jensen, a man whose jaw seemed permanently clenched, made his opinion clear from the day she arrived. He called her princess when he thought she couldn't hear, and Rostova to her face, spitting the name out like it was a bad taste in his mouth. He never used her call sign, Valkyrie, a name she had earned for her uncanny ability to see the whole battlefield from the sky, like the mythological figures who chose the slain. This morning's briefing was no different. The small, windowless room was packed with pilots, all men except for her. They smelled of stale coffee and bravado. Major Jensen stood in front of a large screen displaying a map of a remote sector in Afghanistan. "All right, listen up," Jensen began, his voice a low growl. "We're spinning up a new deployment cycle. Trident Team 4 is going deep into the Korongo Valley. They're hunting a high-value target, so we'll be providing top cover. This is a high-priority mission. No room for errors." His eyes swept the room and landed on Eva. A smirk played on his lips. "Rostova, you'll be flying patrol on the northern perimeter. Simple box pattern. Keep your eyes peeled for any goat herders who look lost. Think you can handle that?" A few snickers rippled through the room. The northern perimeter was miles from the real action, a babysitting assignment. It was a deliberate insult, a public declaration that he didn't trust her with the real mission. Eva felt the familiar heat rise in her cheeks, but she forced it down. She had learned long ago that showing emotion was a sign of weakness in their world. She met his gaze, her expression a mask of calm professionalism. "Yes, Major, I can handle it." Her voice was steady, betraying none of the frustration boiling inside her. She wanted to scream. She wanted to point to her flight records, to the simulator scores that beat every man in this room. She wanted to tell them that her father had never made a single call for her, that he had in fact been harder on her than anyone, wanting her to be twice as good to earn half the respect. But she said nothing. She knew words were useless here. The only thing that mattered was performance. After the briefing, as the pilots filed out, one of them, a young lieutenant named Miller, bumped her shoulder. "Don't worry, princess," he said, with a condescending grin. "We'll call you if we see any big, scary camels." Eva just kept walking, her boots echoing on the polished concrete floor. She headed not for the main hangar, but for a smaller, forgotten one at the far end of the base. Hangar 7. Inside sat an old A-10, cannibalized 4 parts over the years. Its paint was faded, and dust covered its wings like a shroud. This was her sanctuary. An old, grizzled mechanic named Sarge was there, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. He was a Vietnam veteran, a man who had forgotten more about airplanes than most pilots would ever know. He was perhaps the only person on the base who saw her as just a pilot. "Morning, Captain," he said, his voice raspy. "Jensen giving you grief again?" Eva managed a small smile. "The usual." She ran a hand along the cold metal skin of the old warthog. "How's she doing, Sarge?" "Old girl's got more fight in her than they think," he replied, just like her caretaker. Sarge had been helping her in his spare time to keep the plane functional. They scavenged parts, worked on the engine, and kept the systems from decaying completely. It was against a dozen regulations, but Sarge didn't care. He said a plane like this deserved better than to be picked apart by vultures. For Eva, working on this plane was a connection to a purer time, to the stories her father told of when flying was about the machine and the mission, not politics. One day, she whispered to the plane, "We'll get you back in the sky." Sarge just grunted. "Be careful what you wish for, Captain. The sky has a way of asking for more than you're willing to give." Weeks later, the squadron was in Afghanistan. The heat at Bagram Airfield was oppressive, a thick, suffocating blanket. The mission with Trident Team 4 was underway. As assigned, Eva was flying her lonely patrol route, miles away from the Korangal Valley, tracing a lazy rectangle in the sky. Her radio crackled with the routine chatter of air traffic control. But she was also monitoring another frequency, a tactical channel she wasn't supposed to be on. It was a habit, a need to know what was happening, to feel connected to the real fight over on the other side of the mountains. Senior Chief Mark Griffin, leader of Trident 4, led his men through a narrow, rocky canyon. He was a man carved from granite, with eyes that had seen too much. His team moved with the silent, deadly grace of predators. They had been in country for years, hunting the worst of the worst. Today's target was a notorious bomb maker responsible for the deaths of dozens of soldiers. They found his compound tucked into the base of a cliff, just as intelligence had predicted. But intelligence had been wrong about one crucial thing: the number of fighters. There weren't a dozen, there were over 100. The world exploded in a storm of gunfire. The SEALs were caught in a perfectly executed ambush. RPGs slammed into the rocks around them, and machine gun fire tore the air apart. Within minutes, 2 of his men were down, and a third was badly wounded. They were pinned, surrounded, and hopelessly outnumbered. Griff got on the radio, his voice strained but calm. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Trident 4. We are taking heavy fire, multiple casualties. We are pinned down at grid coordinate." He rattled off the numbers. "We need immediate close air support. I repeat, immediate CAS." Back at the command center at Bagram, Major Jensen watched the situation unfold on a drone feed. A cold knot of dread and, to his shame, a flicker of something else opportunity tightened in his stomach. The designated A-10s for the mission were refueling. The nearest backup was 20 minutes out. Too long, they would be slaughtered. "Get me a situation report," he barked at a young airman. "Sir, the primary CAS flight is bingo fuel. The QRF is 25 minutes out. There are no other assets in the area." Jensen stared at the screen, at the tiny green dots representing the SEALs, being swarmed by red dots. He knew Eva was in the air. She was only 10 minutes away, but she was the general's daughter. If she went in and something went wrong, it would be his career on the line. If she succeeded, she would be a hero, and he would never hear the end of it. It was a risk he was unwilling to take. He made a decision, a cold, calculated one. "The official record will show that no air support was available," he said quietly to the officer next to him. Miles away, flying her pointless circle, Eva heard Griff's desperate call. She heard the panic and the professionalism fighting for control in his voice. She heard the gunfire in the background. She checked her map. She was 12 minutes away. She could be there. She keyed her mic. "Command, this is Valkyrie. I am 10 minutes from Trident 4's position. I am fully armed and ready to assist." A moment of silence, then a voice came back, a voice she didn't recognize. "Valkyrie, stand down. Maintain your assigned patrol route." "Sir, they need help now," Eva insisted, her knuckles white on the control stick. "I can get there." Then Jensen's voice cut through the channel, sharp and final. "Captain Rostova, you will follow your orders or you will be grounded. Do you understand me? Maintain your patrol route. That is a direct order." The line went dead. Eva flew on, her heart pounding in her chest. Below her, the rugged, unforgiving landscape of Afghanistan stretched out in every direction. And in a valley she couldn't see, American soldiers were dying. She was following her orders, and for the first time in her life, she felt ashamed to be a soldier. She looked at her fuel gauge and her weapons console. She had everything she needed to save them, except for one thing: permission. The weight of her orders felt heavier than the plane she was flying. The world for Trident Team 4 had shrunk to a few feet of crumbling rock, and the terrifying space between them and the enemy. The air was thick with cordite and dust, so thick, it was hard to breathe. Senior Chief Griffin was pressed against a boulder, the stock of his rifle hot against his cheek. 2 of his men were dead. A third, a young corpsman named Danny, was bleeding out from a wound in his leg. They were down to their last magazines. "This is it, boys," Griff said over their private comms, his voice grimly calm. "Make every shot count. We sell our lives dearly." He had made the call. He had begged for air support. The answer had been a deafening silence. In the back of his mind, he cursed the Air Force, the planners, the whole chain of command that had left them here to die. He thought of his wife, of the daughter he hadn't seen in 6 months. He pushed the thoughts away. Now was not the time. Now was the time to fight. The enemy fighters were growing bolder, creeping closer. He could see their faces now, young and old, all filled with a chilling hatred. He squeezed the trigger, and a man fell. Another took his place. There were too many. It was like trying to hold back the tide with a bucket. Suddenly, from deep within the canyon, a new sound echoed, a sound that didn't belong. It wasn't the crack of a rifle or the boom of an RPG. It was a low, guttural roar that seemed to make the very rocks vibrate. It grew louder, closer, a terrifying crescendo of raw power. One of the younger SEALs looked at Griff, his eyes wide, with a mix of fear and confusion. "What is that?" Griff didn't answer. He knew that sound. Every soldier on the ground in Afghanistan knew that sound. It was the sound of hope. It was the sound of doom. It depended entirely on which direction it was pointed. He looked up. Streaking over the ridge of the canyon, flying dangerously low and fast, was an A-10 Warthog. It was painted in the standard gray camouflage, but something was wrong. There were no markings on its tail, no squadron insignia. Its radio was silent. It was a ghost. The plane banked hard, its wingtips seeming to scrape the canyon walls. For a heart-stopping second, Griff thought it was going to crash. But the pilot was in complete control. The plane leveled out, its nose dipping slightly, and then came the sound that gave the Warthog its name and its reputation. BRRRT. The A-10's GAU-8 Avenger cannon opened up. It wasn't just a sound, it was a physical force. A torrent of 30mm armor-piercing incendiary rounds, fired at a rate of 4,200 per minute, tore into the enemy positions. The ground erupted in a line of fire and smoke. The cannon shells, each the size of a milk bottle, shredded everything they touched: rock, earth, and men. The SEALs instinctively ducked, the noise so overwhelming it felt like the end of the world. The A-10 screamed past them, pulled up into a steep, almost vertical climb, and rolled over, coming back for another pass. The attack was brutally efficient, surgically precise. The pilot wasn't just shooting at the enemy. They were dismantling the ambush. A heavy machine gun nest that had pinned them down for an hour was vaporized in a single burst. A group of fighters trying to flank them was erased from the hillside. From the cockpit, Eva saw the world in shades of green and red through her targeting pod. Her focus was absolute. There was no Major Jensen, no regulations, no career to worry about. There were only the friendlies, the green dots on her screen, and the enemies, the red ones. Her father had once told her that in the air, you achieve a state of pure clarity. Everything non-essential falls away. He was right. She had made her choice the moment Jensen had ordered her to stand down. She had flown her patrol route for another 10 minutes, a war raging in her mind. Obey and live with the shame, disobey and face the consequences. But when she heard Griff's final, resigned transmission, "It's been an honor," something inside her broke. She had turned her plane back, towards Bagram, but not to the main runway. She headed for a deserted landing strip near Hangar 7. She had landed the plane, her official on the books A-10, and left it there. Sarge was waiting. He knew. He must have been listening to the same channels. He didn't say a word, just pointed to the ghost plane. Its cockpit was open, and a ladder was in place. It was already armed and fueled. Sarge had been preparing it, just in case. "They'll court-martial you," he had said, his face a mask of worry. "They have to find me first," she had replied, pulling on her helmet. She had disabled the plane's transponder and IFATHA identification friend or foe system. She would be a ghost on the radar, a phantom in the sky. Now, in the valley. She was the Valkyrie of her call sign, an avenging angel of metal and fire. She made a third pass, this time with rockets. Pods of Hydra rockets streaked from her wings, slamming into the caves where the enemy had been taking cover. The explosions echoed through the canyon, a symphony of destruction. On the ground, the surviving enemy fighters, their ranks shattered and their morale broken, fled in terror. They scrambled back up the hills, disappearing like phantoms. The silence that followed was as shocking as the noise had been. The only sound was the wind whistling through the rocks and the crackle of a few burning fires. The ghost A-10 made one final low pass over the SEAL's position. Griff and his men looked up, their faces smudged with dirt and grime, their expressions a mixture of awe and disbelief. The pilot waggled the plane's wings, a classic aviator's salute, and then banked away, disappearing over the mountains as mysteriously as it had arrived. Griff got on the radio, his voice hoarse. "Command, this is Trident 4. The enemy has been neutralized. We are secure. Be advised. We had an angel on our shoulder, an A-10, no call sign, no response. He saved our lives." Back at Bagram, Major Jensen stared at the drone feed, his face pale. The red dots were gone. The green dots were stationary but safe. He had heard the reports from the valley. He knew what had happened. His eyes darted to the flight operations. board. Eva Rostova's plane was marked as having landed 15 minutes ago, but he knew that wasn't the plane that had just saved Trident 4. He walked quickly to a window that overlooked the flight line. He looked towards the far side of the base, towards the forgotten corner where Hangar 7 stood. The hard stand next to it, where the old decommissioned A-10 had sat for years, was empty. A cold rage, mingled with a sliver of fear, washed over him. She had done it. The general's daughter, the princess, had disobeyed a direct order, stolen a military aircraft, and flown an unsanctioned combat mission. She had saved the SEALs, yes, but she had also made him look like a fool. She had defied him, and for that, he would see her burn. He didn't know how he would prove it yet, but he would find a way. He would tear her career apart, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but dust. The battle in the valley was over, but for Eva Rostova the war was just beginning. The story of the ghost of the Korengil spread through Bagram like wildfire. Soldiers whispered about it in chow halls and hangars. A mysterious A-10, an angel with a cannon, appearing from nowhere to save a team of SEALs from certain death. It was the stuff of legend, a much-needed morale boost in a long and weary war. For the official record, however, the incident did not exist. A preliminary report cited a data anomaly and misidentified ground fire. The case was quietly closed, but Major Jensen was not letting it go. He was a man obsessed. He knew with every fiber of his being that Eva Rostova was the ghost pilot. The audacity of her actions was a personal affront, a challenge to his authority, that he could not ignore, since he couldn't prove she flew the ghost plane without admitting he knew a decommissioned, off-the-books aircraft was secretly being maintained. He decided to break her in a different way. He would use the full weight of his rank and the military bureaucracy to crush her. His campaign began subtly. First, he grounded her indefinitely, citing a pattern of questionable judgment. He ordered a full review of her flight records, her training history, her psychological evaluations. He was looking for a crack, any tiny flaw he could exploit. Eva found herself in a state of administrative limbo. She was confined to the base, stripped of her duties. Her days were spent in her small, sterile room, waiting for the next summons. She was called in for questioning almost daily. The interviews were held in a small, airless office, with two stone-faced officers from the Judge Advocate General's office, the military's legal arm. Jensen was always there, sitting in the corner, observing, his presence a suffocating weight in the room. They asked the same questions over and over. Where were you during the Trident 4 incident, Captain? I was in my quarters, sir. Major Jensen's order to stand down. She would reply, her voice a monotone. Did you have any contact with personnel from Hangar 7 on that day? No, sir. Are you aware that a decommissioned airframe, an A-10, was reported missing from its hardstand and then later returned? I am aware of the rumors, sir. She never wavered. She stuck to her story, her face an unreadable mask. She knew that any show of anger or fear would be twisted and used against her. Her emotional strength, the same quality that made her a top pilot, was now her only defense. But the pressure was immense. In the privacy of her room, late at night, the mask would crumble. The injustice of it all felt like a physical weight on her chest. She had saved men's lives, and she was being treated like a criminal, while the man who would have let them die was her accuser. Meanwhile, halfway around the world, Senior Chief Griff Griffin was back in the United States, on a short leave before his next deployment. The leg wound he'd sustained in the ambush was healing, but the memory of that day was still raw. He owed his life, and the lives of his surviving men, to the pilot of that ghost plane. The official story of a data anomaly felt like an insult. One evening, at a bar near his base in Virginia Beach, he ran into a C-130 pilot he knew. Over a beer, Griff mentioned the incident. You hear anything about this ghost, A-10 in the Korengil? Pilot lowered his voice. Funny you should mention that. The whole A-10 community is buzzing. Word is, they're trying to railroad some female pilot for it. A Captain Rostova, General Rostova's kid. Griff felt a cold knot form in his stomach. A female pilot. He hadn't considered that. He had always pictured a grizzled, veteran male pilot, a maverick like himself. Railroad her for what? Griff asked. Don't know the details, the pilot said. Just that the squadron CO, a real piece of work named Jensen, has it in for her. They're trying to pin something on her, but apparently she's got ice in her veins. Won't give them anything. Griff spent the rest of the night thinking, he thought, about the precision of the attack runs, the almost intuitive way the pilot had understood the ground situation. It wasn't just good flying, it was brilliant. He thought about the final, gentle waggle of the wings, a gesture of solidarity, and he thought about the cold, bureaucratic silence that had followed. A hero was being punished, and the system was letting it happen. He felt the familiar, bitter taste of injustice. He decided he couldn't let it stand. Using his contacts in the special operations community, a network built on trust and shared sacrifice, Griff started making quiet phone calls. He wasn't looking for official answers, he was looking for the truth. He spoke to controllers who were on duty that day, to mechanics, to other pilots in Ava's squadron. A picture began to form, a story of a talented, dedicated pilot being undermined by a prejudiced commander back in Bagram. Jensen was getting desperate. Eva wasn't breaking. The investigation was stalling. He needed something concrete, something he could use to formally charge her. If he couldn't prove she flew the ghost plane, he would have to invent another crime. Late one night, he used his master key to enter the empty squadron offices. He went to Ava's computer. With a few keystrokes, he planted a file deep in her hard drive, a draft of an email, addressed to a journalist, detailing a fabricated plan to fly an unsanctioned mission to protest the military's ineffective rules of engagement. It was crude, but it might be enough. He then went to her locker and planted a small, encrypted USB drive containing classified mission parameters for operations she wasn't cleared for. The next day, the investigators discovered the new evidence. The tone of the questioning changed. It was no longer about an unsanctioned flight. It was about espionage, about treason. Eva was in her room when two military police officers arrived. Captain Eva Rostova, one of them said, his voice devoid of emotion, "You are under arrest. You are being charged with theft of a military asset, insubordination, violation of Article 134 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and conduct unbecoming an officer. You have the right to remain silent." They put her in handcuffs. As they led her across the base, she saw Major Jensen watching from his office window. He had a faint, triumphant smile on his face. He had taken her wings, her reputation, and now her freedom. As the doors of the transport vehicle closed, plunging her into darkness, Eva felt a despair so profound it was almost suffocating. Her career was over. Her life was ruined, and the men she had saved would never know the truth. The court-martial was held at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. Back in the dry heat of the Arizona desert, the setting was a return to the beginning of her ordeal, but the atmosphere had changed. From one of quiet hostility to one of cold formal judgment. The courtroom was sterile and imposing, all dark wood and polished brass. The American flag stood in the corner, a silent witness to the proceedings. Eva sat at the defense table in her dress uniform, her face pale but her posture erect. She looked small and alone. The prosecution team was confident, led by a sharp, ambitious captain who was clearly in Major Jensen's sphere of influence. They laid out their case with methodical precision. They presented the planted evidence. The email draft suggesting a rogue mentality, the USB drive with classified data. They called a series of witnesses, pilots from her squadron, who testified that Captain Rostova was aloof, arrogant, and had a problem with authority. They painted a picture of a reckless officer, desperate to live up to her father's legacy, who felt she was above the rules. The centerpiece of the prosecution's case was the testimony of Major David Jensen. He took the stand, the very picture of a commanding officer. Authoritative and concerned. He spoke in a low, steady voice, describing Eva as a talented but emotionally compromised pilot. He twisted every instance of his own prejudice into an example of her insubordination. Captain Rostova has a history of questioning orders she deems beneath her, Jensen said, looking at the panel of 3 senior officers who served as the jury. She felt the patrol assignment on the day of the Trident for incident was an insult to her skills. It is my belief that she orchestrated this entire event, including the theft of the decommissioned airframe, as a way to prove a point, to show up her command. He lied with a practiced ease, his words weaving a net of circumstantial evidence that was slowly closing around Eva. Ava's appointed defense lawyer, a young overworked captain named Elias Vance, did his best to poke holes in the testimony, but he was outmatched. The evidence, though fabricated, was tangible. Ava's refusal to show emotion on the stand was being interpreted as coldness, as a lack of remorse. The case looked hopeless. During a recess, Vance turned to Eva, his expression grim. "Captain, they're burying us. Unless you can give me something, anything, to fight back with, you're going to be convicted." Eva looked at the flag, then at the faces of the judges. She had followed the rules her whole life. She had believed in the system, in the idea that honor and duty would prevail. But the system was failing her. It was being manipulated by a man who had neither honor nor a sense of duty. She knew then that she couldn't win by playing his game. She had to change the board. "I want to take the stand," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Vance was shocked. "Eva, that's a huge risk. They'll tear you apart." "They're already tearing me apart," she replied. "It's time I said my piece." When the trial resumed, Eva walked to the witness stand. She didn't confess. She didn't talk about the ghost plane. Instead, she spoke about duty. She calmly and methodically detailed every instance of Jensen's harassment, not with anger, but with a chilling clarity. She described the princess' comments, the demeaning assignments, the constant undermining of her authority. She wasn't making an accusation. She was presenting a pattern of behavior. "The prosecution claims I am reckless," she said, her voice resonating through the silent courtroom. "But I ask you, what is more reckless? A pilot who is willing to risk her career to answer a call for help, or a commander who is willing to let his men die to protect his own record?" She had their attention. The judges were leaning forward. Jensen was shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "I cannot speak to the events in the Korangal Valley," she continued, choosing her words with surgical care. "But I can speak about the oath I took. An oath to support and defend. That oath doesn't end when you are ordered to fly in a circle. It is a promise made to every soldier on the ground. A promise that we in the sky will do everything in our power to bring them home." It was a powerful speech, but it was still just her word against his. As the prosecutor stood up for his cross-examination, ready to rip her testimony to shreds, Captain Vance stood up. "Your Honors," he said, his voice suddenly filled with a newfound confidence. "The defense calls a surprise witness, Senior Chief Mark Griffin." A murmur went through the courtroom. The doors at the back opened and Griff walked in. He was in his full dress uniform, his chest covered in medals, his presence commanding immediate respect. He walked with a slight limp, a permanent reminder of the day in question. Jensen's face went white. Griff took the stand and was sworn in. Vance began his questioning. "Senior Chief, could you please describe the events of the ambush in the Korangal Valley with harrowing detail?" Griff recounted the battle. He described the hopelessness, the certainty of death. Then he described the arrival of the ghost plane. "It wasn't just air support," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It was a miracle. The pilot didn't just save us. They fought with an intelligence, a ferocity I have never seen. They knew exactly where we were, where the enemy was, what we needed, before we even asked for it." He then turned his attention to the investigation. "The official story is a lie," he stated bluntly. "So I did my own digging." He explained how he had contacted other personnel, piecing together the story of Jensen's vendetta against Eva. Then came the bombshell. "My men wear helmet cameras," Griff explained. "They record everything, audio and video. The recordings from that day were mostly noise gunfire, explosions, but our technicians were able to isolate something from the background of Arcom's chatter." Vance produced a small audio player. "Permission to play the recording for the court?" The judge nodded. Vance pressed play. A hiss of static filled the room, then a voice, distorted but recognizable. It was Major Jensen, speaking to the command center operator at Bagram during the height of the ambush. Just hold back," Jensen's voice said, strained and panicked. "Don't send anyone else in. The situation is too chaotic. Let it resolve itself." A gasp went through the courtroom. Let it resolve itself. It was a clear, unambiguous order to do nothing. In order to let Trident 4 be wiped out. Griff wasn't finished. "That recording proves the commander on duty was willing to sacrifice us, but it doesn't explain why." So we dug deeper. He looked directly at Jensen. "We recovered the data logs from the command center. We found a deleted communication log. It seems the major had misread the initial intelligence, placing the enemy's strength at a fraction of its actual size. He sent us into a death trap, and when it went wrong, he tried to bury his mistake by letting us die." The courtroom erupted. Jensen leaped to his feet, his face purple with rage. "This is a lie, a fabrication." But it was too late. The truth, raw and undeniable, was out. The recording, the data logs, the testimony of a respected war hero was an avalanche that was about to bury him. The judges looked at Jensen not with suspicion, but with pure contempt. Eva watched him, not with triumph, but with a quiet, sad finality. She had been fighting for her career. He had been fighting to hide his cowardice, and in the end, the truth had been the most powerful weapon of all. The fallout from Senior Chief Griffin's testimony was swift and decisive. The court-martial of Captain Eva Rostova was immediately halted. The charges against her were dismissed with prejudice, a legal term meaning they could never be brought again. The courtroom, which had been the stage for her persecution, became the scene of her vindication. Major David Jensen was arrested on the spot. The man who had wielded his power with such arrogance and cruelty was stripped of his command and placed in custody, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. He would face his own martial not just for perjury and conduct unbecoming an officer, but for dereliction of duty and the willful endangerment of a special operations team. His career was over. His life as he knew it was in ruins. For Eve, the victory felt strange. It wasn't the triumphant fist-pumping moment she might have imagined. It was quiet and heavy, filled with the weight of all that had happened. She had won, but the scars remained. She had seen the ugly underbelly of the system she had sworn to serve, a system that could be twisted by the personal vendettas of flawed men. A few days later, as she was preparing to be reinstated for flight duty, she was in Hangar 7, standing beside the ghost plane. It sat silently, its secrets safe. Sarge was there, polishing a spot on its nose. He didn't say much, just gave her a nod that was filled with more pride than any medal could convey. The hangar door rolled open, and 3 men walked in. It was Senior Chief Griffin and the 2 other survivors of his team. They were in their simple utility uniforms, not their dress blues. They walked over to Eva. Griff, a man of few words, looked her in the eye. His gaze was steady and filled with a profound, unspoken understanding. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. We were told the official investigation into the unsanctioned air support in the Korangal Valley was closed, he said, his voice a low rumble. They said the pilot's identity could never be confirmed. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. We never saw who was in that cockpit. We don't need to know, but I will tell you this. Whoever it was, they were the best pilot I have ever seen. We owe them our lives. He extended his hand. Eva took it. His grip was firm, a silent transfer of respect and gratitude. There were no more words needed. They were soldiers, bound by a shared experience that transcended rank and service branch. They understood sacrifice, and they understood honor. They saluted her, a gesture of ultimate respect from one warrior to another, and then they left. Months passed. The seasons changed back at Davis Mutton. Eva was no longer the outcast. The whispers that followed her now were not of nepotism, but of awe. She was the pilot who had faced down the system and won. She was the pilot the SEALs saluted. She was a legend. She was also, now, a squadron leader. She had been promoted to major, taking the position Jensen had vacated. Her call sign, Valkyrie, was now spoken with reverence. She led her pilots with a quiet confidence, demanding excellence but fostering a sense of camaraderie and trust that Jensen had never understood. One afternoon, she was leading a formation of 4A-10S on a training exercise over the Arizona desert. The sky was a brilliant, endless blue. The sun warmed the cockpit, and the familiar hum of the engines was a comforting song. A call came over the radio, patched through from the command center. It was a real-world alert. A team of Army Rangers was pinned down by unexpected resistance in a training simulation gone wrong in the mountains to the east. Ava's voice was calm, strong, and filled with a purpose that had been forged in fire and injustice. Command, this is Valkyrie Flight. We are changing course. We're on our way. She banked her Warthog, the other 3 planes following in perfect formation. She looked out at the horizon, at the sky that was her home. She had found her justice, not in revenge, but in earning her rightful place. Her reward was not a medal or a commendation, but the trust of the men she led and the profound satisfaction of doing her duty. The final report on the ghost of the Korangal, written by Senior Chief Griffin, officially concluded the case. The identity of the pilot remains unknown. It read, "It is the recommendation of this investigator that the incident be left as is. Some heroes don't need a name. Sometimes, a legend serves a greater purpose. It's a reminder to every soldier that even when the system fails, there are those who will not. There are those who will always answer the call." As Eva flew towards the distant mountains, a small knowing smile touched her lips. The truth was her secret, a quiet bond between her plane, and the men she had saved. The sky belonged to her now, not by birthright but by courage, and in the cockpit of her Warthog, she was finally, truly, free.